The president's executive order includes a clause stating that U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods will increase if Canada retaliates, although it's unclear on the specifics. And while the tariffs aren't set to kick in until tomorrow, many Canadians are rightly concerned about what this trade war will mean for Canadians and the Canadian economy. Concordia University's Dr. Moshe Lander joined us to discuss the cost of the trade war.
Every Canadian will be affected by Trump's tariffs, and it has nothing to do with us retaliating. The tariffs from the US alone are enough to affect everybody. Some will be directly affected. So if you're operating in those headline industries that Canada's famous for, lumber, oil and gas, agriculture, farming, mining, autos, fisheries, water and power generation, you're going to be hit. But the secondary and tertiary effects are going to be all the way down to the barista at Starbucks, because if Canadian businesses affected by these tariffs start scaling back production and they start laying off workers, then people aren't going into work as much or staying as long. They don't need their coffee in the morning. And so next thing you know, they're not spending as much at the local store, in the local restaurant. They're not buying as much from Canadian businesses that have nothing otherwise to do with the US. So they're going to find that they're going to have to start laying off workers, or that it's going to disrupt their supply chains. So nobody is spared from this. It's just that the headline industries, the ones that make up the backbone of the Canadian economy, are going to be the ones that make the news, but you'll be able to find anecdotal evidence all the way down the line. The issue is just how fast will those effects show up? And that's partly a function of the supply chain and how integrated it is with the US, how much inventory is currently stockpiled in the US, but it'll also be a function of how strong is Canada relative to the US in all of these industries. The stronger we are, the more that we can push the cost of the tariff onto American consumers. The weaker we are, the more it's going to be absorbed by domestic businesses. And we're going to see the economic play of, I'm going to build a wall and get Mexico to pay for it. This is going to be, I'm going to put a tariff on Canada and I'm going to get Canada to pay for it. That's why he created the External Revenue Service. It's to collect all of that wonderful tariff revenue that he was talking about in his inaugural address.
We also asked Professor Lander about the impact of Canada's response on Canadian consumers.
So the Canadian response makes sense from a political standpoint. It doesn't make sense from an economic standpoint. Again, it's going to become an issue of relative strength. In a lot of the industries that Canada is targeting, Canada doesn't have a competing industry to go head to head with the US. And so in this case, because we don't have that relative strength, the tariff is actually going to fall on our consumers, not on their producers. And so it's almost like two wrongs making a bigger wrong, even though the government's going to try and sell it on two wrongs making a right, that if they're going to do damage to us, then we're going to inflict damage on them to make them think twice. In fact, it's going to be they're going to impose damage on us and we're going to impose damage on ourselves. And then we're going to look at the Americans and say, have you learned your lesson? This is merely going to incite them to increase tariffs. And the president said that last week. He's not done at 25 if necessary. He'll happily go higher. The president sees trade as a zero-sum game, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Trade is never a zero-sum game. But if you're working with somebody who has that mindset, then it has to be the case that in his mind, he won't walk away until he feels that the US has won and that Canada has lost.